I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows they're bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. 32 years ago, that made the fictional Howard Beale mad as hell, and he didn't have Iraq or Afghanistan. In our third story tonight, we do. John McCain yesterday arrived in Iraq secretly. Can't be too safe, even though the Baghdad market that he toured a year ago, not safe enough to go to now. Ditto, Vice President Cheney arriving today, also secretly, even as a majority of Iraqis tell a major new poll the surge has not improved their security situation. The Iraqis possibly biased by events such as today's 5 bombings in Baghdad, including 2 U.S. soldiers dead, 6 kids killed by mortar fire, and a Karbala suicide bombing, killing 40 people shortly after Cheney proclaimed the U.S. invasion a success, as American fatalities reached 3,990. McCain boldly expanding his 100 years in Iraq platform to Afghanistan, telling London's Sunday Telegraph he thinks Americans should prepare for that kind of commitment. 100 years, possibly the exact time in mind that Mr. Bush had when he said today our economy will be fine in the long run. This 3 days after he warned homeowners not to expect more government help, and 1 day after the government used $30 billion of taxpayer money to cover the risks J.P. Morgan took on in buying Bear Stearns Sunday, 7 cents on the dollar. Bear Stearns, America's 5th largest investment firm, having succumbed to the Bush economy after having survived 12 recessions and the Great Depression. And the Fed chairman, Ben Bernanke, invoking powers this weekend not used since the Great Depression. So the Fed can now lend money not just to banks, but to investment firms like Bear Stearns. The New York Times reporting Fed officials are in talks with other firms concerned they may be in trouble too. Despite all this, despite the fact global markets tumbled even after the Bear Stearns sale, President Bush today said the work of his Treasury Secretary should reassure the world.
You've shown the country and the world that the United States is on top of the situation.
Exactly what bold steps, what brilliant initiative of the Treasury Secretary was supposed to reassure investors around the world? That previous quote in full context.
I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for working over the weekend. You've shown the country and the world that the United States is on top of the situation.
It's hard work. It's incredibly hard. It's hard work. Let's bring in MSNBC political analyst Eugene Robinson, also associate editor and columnist of the Washington Post. Gene, thanks again for your time tonight.
Good to be here, Keith.
All right, let's follow the money first as it goes down the drain. The Fed took these extraordinary steps this weekend, which Mr. Bush applauds, to ensure the stability of the American markets. Why is he so hostile to steps that would ensure the stability of, families losing their houses?
A very good question. It's, the two situations would seem to be similar, right? You have a giant investment bank about to go bankrupt, about to fail, and so you commit $30 billion of taxpayers' money to back the sale of Bear Stearns to J.P. Morgan. You got a whole bunch of homeowners who are about to be foreclosed on because of this subprime mortgage mess. They're about to go bankrupt too, but you don't do exactly the same thing. I think it's called Republican dogma on how you handle these financial crises.
Well, it's a word that begins with dog. Alan Greenspan wrote yesterday that this financial crisis will be seen as the most wrenching one since the end of the Second World War. The Fed chairman, Mr. Bernanke, is calling for strong oversight of the banks. The FDIC chair called for aggressive intervention from the government. And the president, he has his own working group on financial markets. It last week had recommended a series of tough new regulations. Is there any way to see Mr. Bush's refusal as anything but an effort to help rich people get richer at the expense of the taxpayers?
Well, what happened last weekend, and really the Bush administration's response to this whole crisis has looked like a series of diving catches. Now, even if you set aside the fact that, he's much more willing to help, the golf-playing, bridge-playing chairman, millionaire chairman of Bear Stearns than, Joe or Susie homeowner, it's all, last minute and kind of a bit chaotic, the way they've tried to handle what looked like a crisis to many people months ago, but the Bush administration wouldn't treat it as a crisis, just treated it as, well, they kept saying, well, the economy's fine, the fundamentals are sound, everything's going to be rosy in the long run.
Now the blood part of blood money in Iraq, Mr. McCain called his trip a fact-finding mission, said it wasn't part of his campaign. Now he's talking about a similar length, 100-year commitment to Afghanistan. He told the same interviewer from the London paper he's not convinced Iran is no longer a threat. Is he not painting himself into a corner that he's beginning to look like a warmonger who makes Bush look cautious?
He is, but he ran into this corner and, with buckets and buckets of paint. I mean, the one thing you can say about John McCain is he is not running from this war issue. Whether he thinks it's a winner politically or not, he seems very committed to it. It can't have been accidental that he was in Iraq at the same time as Dick Cheney, the man who told us that we'd be greeted as liberators, and the man who told us the insurgency was in its last throes. John McCain is fully committed to the George Bush, Dick Cheney plan on the war in Iraq and now Afghanistan as well. And, 100 years, a long time.
And can't the Democrats just put him in there as like an older, crazier Barry Goldwater? I'll just leave that as a rhetorical question. Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post and MSNBC. It's always a pleasure, Gene. Thank you.
Good to talk to you, Keith.